Imagine a man with no books, no school, and no wealth. He never wrote a single word. And yet his questions shook the foundations of an empire and changed the way humans think forever. This is Socrates, the stonemason's son who became the father of Western philosophy. But before we drift off into the story, leave a like and comment where you are listening from, so others can find their way here too. Now, let us journey back to the dusty streets of ancient Athens to discover how one man's relentless curiosity led him to wisdom, to trial, and to an immortal death. The story of Socrates begins in a world that was just learning to think in a new way. Around the year 470 BCE, in the golden city of Athens, a boy was born to a family of modest means. His father was named Sophists, and he was a stonemason, or sculptor, who carved statues and monuments. His mother was named Phainarete, and she was a midwife who helped women bring new life into the world. The young Socrates grew up in a city that was rapidly becoming the most remarkable place on earth. Athens was not just a city, it was an experiment. It was a place where ordinary citizens were beginning to govern themselves. The Greeks called this new system democratia, the rule of the people. This was a radical and dangerous idea in a world still dominated by kings and tyrants. The Athens of Socrates' childhood was a city of contradictions. It was a place of breathtaking beauty, with gleaming marble temples rising on the great rock of the Acropolis. It was also a place of crowded streets, open sewers, and constant noise. The citizens gathered in the agora, the central marketplace, to buy and sell goods, to argue about politics, and to hear the latest news from the wider Greek world. This agora would become the stage for Socrates' entire life. He would spend his days wandering through its colonnades, stopping strangers, and asking them the most unsettling questions they had ever heard. But that calling was still many years away. First, the young man had to grow up in a world that was about to be tested by the greatest war it had ever known. When Socrates was still a boy, a terrifying threat appeared from the east. The mighty Persian Empire, the largest and most powerful kingdom the world had ever seen, launched a massive invasion of Greece. The Persian king Darius I sent a huge fleet and a vast army to punish the Greeks for daring to defy him. The Athenians, outnumbered and facing certain destruction, met the Persian forces on the plain of Marathon in 490 BCE. Against all odds, the Athenian citizen soldiers defeated the invaders in one of the most famous battles in history. The victory saved Athens and proved that free citizens fighting for their own city could defeat even the mightiest empire. 10 years later, the Persians returned. This time the new king Xerxes led an army so large that ancient writers said it drank entire rivers dry. The Greeks formed a fragile alliance to resist. At the narrow pass of Thermopylae, 300 Spartans and their allies made a legendary last stand, sacrificing themselves to delay the Persian advance. Athens itself was evacuated and burned by the invaders, but the Athenian navy, brilliantly led by the general Themistocles, lured the Persian fleet into the narrow straits of Salamis. There, the lighter and more manoeuvrable Greek ships destroyed the Persian armada. The threat was over. Greece was saved. The young Socrates had grown up in the shadow of these epic struggles. The stories of Marathon and Salamis were not ancient history to him. They were the living memory of his parents and their generation. The lesson they taught was clear. Courage, wisdom, and unity could overcome any obstacle. These values would shape everything Socrates believed. The victory over Persia ushered in a new era of Athenian power and confidence. Under the leadership of the great statesman Pericles, Athens transformed itself into the cultural and intellectual capital of the Greek world. The wealth that flowed into the city from its maritime empire funded an explosion of art, architecture, and thought. The Parthenon, the most beautiful temple ever built, rose on the Acropolis as a symbol of Athenian greatness. Playwrights like Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides invented the art of tragedy, creating dramas that explored the deepest questions of human existence. This was the world in which Socrates came of age. It was a world of intense, intellectual excitement, where old beliefs were being questioned and new ideas were being born every day. It was in this vibrant atmosphere that Socrates began his education. As the son of a craftsman, he likely learned his father's trade. Ancient sources tell us that Socrates was himself a skilled stonemason in his youth, Some later traditions even claimed that he carved the statues of the three Graces that stood near the entrance to the Acropolis. Whether or not this is true, the image of the young philosopher working with his hands, shaping hard stone into beautiful forms, is a powerful one. The work of a stonemason requires patience and precision. A single wrong stroke of the chisel can ruin an entire block of marble. Perhaps it was from this early training that Socrates learned the careful, methodical approach he would later apply to philosophical arguments. Just as a sculptor must chip away the excess stone to reveal the form hidden within, Socrates would learn to chip away false beliefs to reveal the truth hidden within the human mind. His mother's profession may have been even more important to his future. Phainerete helped women give birth. She brought new life into the world. This was a sacred and honoured role in ancient Greek society. The midwife did not create the baby was already there, growing inside the mother. The midwife's job was to help bring forth what already existed, to guide it into the light. Socrates would later describe his own philosophical method in exactly these terms. He said he was a midwife of ideas. He did not put thoughts into other people's heads. Instead, he helped them give birth to the thoughts that were already inside them, waiting to be discovered. Just as his mother assisted at physical births, Socrates assisted at intellectual births. He was there to help, to guide, to ease the process. But the creation itself came from within the other person. The young Socrates also received a basic education in music, poetry, and physical training. Every Athenian boy of his time would have learned to recite the great poems of Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey. These epic tales of war, heroism, and cunning were the foundation of Greek culture. Socrates knew them by heart and often quoted them in his later conversations. He also learned to play the lyre and to sing. Music was considered essential to a proper education. It was believed to shape the character and harmonise the soul. Physical training was equally important. Athens needed citizen soldiers, and every young man learned to wrestle, throw the javelin, and handle weapons. The combination of intellectual and physical education was meant to produce a balanced human being, strong in both body and mind. Socrates embodied this ideal throughout his life, as comfortable on the battlefield as he was in philosophical debate. As a young man, Socrates was drawn to the new thinkers who were arriving in Athens from all over the Greek world. These men were called the natural philosophers. They were trying to explain the world not through myths and gods, but through reason and observation. The first of these thinkers, Thales of Miletus, had declared that everything in the universe was made of water. Others proposed different fundamental elements. One thinker named Anaxagoras, who became a friend of Pericles, taught that the universe was governed by a cosmic mind or intelligence. Socrates was fascinated by these ideas. He read eagerly and listened to the debates. But he eventually grew disillusioned. These natural philosophers were brilliant at explaining the movements of the stars and the origins of earthquakes, but they seemed to have nothing to say about the questions that mattered most to Socrates. What is justice? What is courage? What is the good life? How should a human being live? This turning point was the moment Socrates found his true calling. He stopped looking up at the heavens and started looking into the human heart. He famously said that he was interested not in the trees in the countryside, but in the men in the city. His new mission was to examine human life itself. He wanted to understand what made a person truly good and what made a city truly just. This was a revolutionary shift. Before Socrates, philosophy was mainly about explaining the natural world. After Socrates, philosophy became primarily about understanding ourselves. This is why later thinkers would say that Socrates brought philosophy down from the heavens to the earth. He made it about us. The method Socrates developed to pursue this mission was as revolutionary as the mission itself. He did not write books or give long lectures. Instead, he simply walked through the streets of Athens and talked to people. He would approach anyone, from powerful politicians to humble craftsmen, and engage them in conversation. His approach was always the same. He would ask a simple question. What is courage? What is justice? What is virtue? The person he was talking to would usually give a confident answer. They were, after all, supposed to know these things. A general should know what courage is. A judge should know what justice is. But then Socrates would begin to ask follow-up questions. He would probe the answer, looking for contradictions and weaknesses. Slowly, patiently, relentlessly, he would unravel the person's initial certainty. This method of questioning became known as the Socratic method, or the elenchus. The word elenchus means a test or a refutation. Socrates used his questions not to teach a doctrine, but to expose ignorance. He showed people that they did not really understand the things they thought they understood perfectly well. This was deeply uncomfortable. Imagine being a respected general, known for your bravery in battle, and having a barefoot philosopher demonstrate in front of a crowd that you cannot actually define what courage is. The general might start by saying that courage is standing firm in battle and not running away. But Socrates would then ask about the courage of a person who retreats strategically to fight another day. Is that not also courageous? The general would have to admit that it was. So courage cannot simply be about standing firm. The general might try another definition, and Socrates would find a flaw in that one too. Round and round the conversation would go, each answer revealing new problems, until the confident general was reduced to confusion and frustration. Many of the people Socrates questioned were humiliated and angry. They were made to look foolish in public. They became his enemies. But Socrates believed this process, however painful, was essential. He thought that recognizing your own ignorance was the first step toward true wisdom. You cannot learn what you think you already know. The only way to begin the search for truth is to admit that you do not yet possess it. Socrates compared this uncomfortable process to the sting of a torpedo fish, a creature that paralyzes its prey with an electric shock. Being questioned by Socrates felt like being stung and paralyzed. It was disorienting and even painful, but it was also the beginning of a genuine awakening. The remarkable thing about Socrates was that he applied this same rigorous method to himself. He famously claimed that the only thing he knew was that he knew nothing. This was not false modesty. It was a genuine philosophical position. Socrates believed that human wisdom was worth very little compared to the wisdom of the gods. He saw himself not as a wise man, but as a seeker of wisdom. The Greek word for this is philosophos, a lover of wisdom. Socrates was the first to truly embody this idea. He was not a sage dispensing answers from on high. He was a fellow traveller, stumbling through the darkness alongside everyone else, simply trying to ask the right questions. This humility in the face of the unknown was at the very heart of his philosophy. There was one peculiar thing about Socrates that set him apart from other men. He claimed to hear an inner voice, which he called his daimonion. This was not a god in the full sense, but a kind of divine sign or spiritual guide. The voice never told Socrates what to do, it only warned him against doing things that would be harmful. It was a voice of restraint, a check on his actions. Socrates took this voice very seriously. He believed it was a genuine communication from the divine realm, a gift that had been given to him alone. When the voice was silent, he felt free to act. When it spoke, he always obeyed. This mysterious inner voice was one of the things that made Socrates seem strange and unsettling to his fellow Athenians. It was also one of the charges that would later be brought against him, that he was introducing new divinities into the city. It was this relentless questioning that brought Socrates into conflict with a powerful new group of thinkers who had arrived in Athens. They were called the Sophists. The name comes from the Greek word sophia, meaning wisdom. The Sophists were professional teachers who travelled from city to city, offering instruction in the skills needed for success in public life. They taught rhetoric, the art of persuasive speaking. They taught argumentation and debate. In a democracy like Athens, where citizens had to speak for themselves in court and in the assembly, these were extremely valuable skills. The Sophists charged high fees for their lessons, and they became wealthy and famous. Young men from ambitious families flocked to study with them, hoping to learn the secrets of political power. The most famous of the Sophists was Protagoras, who declared that man is the measure of all things. By this he meant that truth is relative to each individual. What seems true to you is true for you, and what seems true to me is true for me. There is no higher standard by which to judge between us. Another sophist named Gorgias was said to be so skilled at speaking that he could make any argument seem convincing, no matter how absurd. He reportedly boasted that he could teach a student to persuade any audience of anything. Some sophists made even more radical claims. Thrasymachus, who appears in one of Plato's dialogues, argued that justice is simply the advantage of the stronger. The powerful make the rules, and what is called justice is simply whatever benefits those in power. The weak call it unjust only because they are not the ones benefiting. Socrates had a deep and fundamental disagreement with the Sophists. They claimed to teach virtue, but Socrates believed they were only teaching cleverness. The Sophists taught their students how to win an argument, not how to find the truth. Their goal was victory, not understanding. This kind of moral relativism horrified Socrates. He believed with every fibre of his being that there was a real, objective truth about how human beings should live. Justice was not a trick. Goodness was not an illusion. The goal of philosophy was to discover these eternal truths, not to manipulate people with clever words. This conflict between Socrates and the Sophists was a battle for the soul of Athenian education. It was a struggle that would echo through all of Western thought. Despite his humble origins and his lack of personal wealth, Socrates became one of the most well-known figures in Athens. He was an unmistakable sight on the streets. Ancient sources describe him as physically ugly, with a flat, upturned nose, bulging eyes, and a thick, stocky body. He was often compared to a satyr, one of the comical, half-human creatures from Greek mythology. He was known for walking barefoot in all seasons, and for wearing the same rough cloak year after year. He seemed completely indifferent to physical comfort and worldly possessions. He lived in voluntary poverty, accepting no payment for his conversations. This austere lifestyle was itself a kind of philosophical statement. Socrates believed that the good life was not about accumulating wealth or pleasure. It was about caring for your soul. Socrates eventually married a woman named Xanthippe. Her name has become a byword for a nagging wife, as later stories often portrayed her as shrewish and difficult. The truth is that we know very little about her. What we do know is that she bore Socrates 3 sons. She also had to manage a household with almost no money, while her husband spent his days in philosophical conversation instead of earning a living. If she was sometimes frustrated, it is easy to understand why. Socrates, for his part, seems to have accepted her complaints as a kind of philosophical training. He is reported to have said that just as a horseman should train with the most spirited horses, so a person who wants to learn to deal with people should live with a difficult partner. It is a characteristically Socratic way of looking at things. The life of philosophical conversation was interrupted by the brutal realities of war. In 431 BCE, Athens became embroiled in a devastating conflict with its rival power, Sparta. This was the Peloponnesian War, a struggle that would last for nearly 3 decades and ultimately destroy the Athenian Empire. The war pitted 2 very different Greek ways of life against each other. Athens was a democracy, a naval power, a city of commerce and culture, an intellectual ferment. Sparta was an oligarchy, a land power, a city of warriors who trained from childhood for battle. Both sides believed they were fighting for survival. The war was brutal, total, and transformative. It touched every corner of the Greek world. Socrates served as a soldier, a hoplite or heavy infantryman in several of the war's major campaigns. A hoplite was a citizen soldier who provided his own armour and weapons. He fought in a close formation called a phalanx, shoulder to shoulder with his fellow citizens, shields overlapping to form a wall. It was a terrifying form of combat that required absolute trust in your comrades. Socrates was known for his remarkable physical endurance and his absolute fearlessness in battle. At the siege of Potidaea in the early years of the war, Socrates is said to have performed extraordinary acts of both endurance and courage. The winter was bitter cold, and while other soldiers wrapped themselves in extra clothing, Socrates walked barefoot over the ice, wearing only his usual thin cloak. He seemed completely unaffected by the cold that made others miserable. He was also said to have saved the life of the young Alcibiades, who would later become one of the most controversial figures in Athenian history. When Alcibiades was wounded and in danger of being captured or killed, Socrates stood over him and defended him until help arrived. He then ensured that Alcibiades, not himself, received the prize for valour, out of generosity and humility. At the Battle of Delium in 424 BCE, when the Athenian army was routed and fled in panic. Before the victorious Boeotians, Socrates was praised for his calm and orderly retreat. While others threw down their shields and ran in terror, Socrates walked slowly and deliberately, facing the enemy and discouraging pursuit. The general Laches, who was present, later praised Socrates for his cool head under pressure. He said that if everyone had behaved like Socrates, Athens would not have suffered such a disgraceful defeat. The philosopher who questioned everything in the agora became, on the battlefield, a model of steadfast courage. The war brought immense suffering to Athens. Early in the conflict, a terrible plague swept through the crowded city, killing a third of the population, including the great leader Pericles himself. The Athenians, once so confident and powerful, became desperate and demoralized. Political factions turned on each other. The democracy became increasingly unstable and prone to poor decisions. In one of the most shameful episodes, the Athenian assembly voted to execute the generals who had won a naval victory, but had failed to rescue drowning sailors due to a storm. This was a violation of their own laws, which required individual trials. Socrates, who happened to be serving in a minor political role that day, was the only official who refused to put the illegal motion to a vote. He stood alone against the fury of the mob, insisting on the rule of law even when it was unpopular. It was a moment that perfectly illustrated his character. He would follow his conscience regardless of the consequences. The long war finally ended in 404 BCE with the total defeat of Athens. The Spartan victors installed a brutal oligarchy, a council of 30 tyrants, to rule the city. These tyrants launched a reign of terror, executing their political enemies and confiscating the property of wealthy citizens. One of the leaders of this bloody regime was a man named Critias, who had once been an associate of Socrates. The tyrants tried to implicate Socrates in their crimes. They ordered him to arrest an innocent man named Leon of Salamis so that he could be executed. Socrates simply refused. He went home and waited to be killed. He was saved only when the tyranny was overthrown, and democracy was restored shortly afterward. This episode shows that Socrates was equally willing to defy a tyranny as he was to defy a mob. He would not do wrong, no matter who commanded it. After the fall of the 30 tyrants, Athens tried to heal its wounds and rebuild its democracy. But the scars of the war and the tyranny ran deep. The city was searching for someone to blame for its misfortunes. In this atmosphere of suspicion and resentment, the enemies of Socrates saw an opportunity. In 499 BCE, when Socrates was about 70 years old, 3 men brought formal charges against him. Their names were Meletus, Anytus, and Lycon. Meletus was a poet, Anytus was a wealthy tanner and politician, and Lycon was an orator. The charges they brought were shocking. They accused Socrates of impiety, of not believing in the gods of the city, and of introducing new divinities. They also accused him of corrupting the youth of Athens. These charges were both legally serious and politically motivated. The charge of impiety was a capital offence. The accusation of corrupting the youth was a way of blaming Socrates for the actions of some of his former associates, like the tyrant Critias and the scandalous Alcibiades, who had betrayed Athens during the war. The real crime of Socrates, however, was simply being who he was. He had spent decades questioning the powerful and the proud. He had exposed the ignorance of those who thought they were wise. He had made enemies of influential men. Now, in a wounded and fearful city, those enemies saw their chance. The trial of Socrates took place before a jury of 500 Athenian citizens. This was a large number, designed to make bribery difficult and to represent the will of the people. In Athenian courts, there were no lawyers. The accused had to speak for themselves. There was no judge to rule on matters of law. The jury was everything. They heard the evidence, decided guilt or innocence, and determined the punishment. Each side was given a limited amount of time to speak, measured by a water clock. Socrates rose to defend his life with the same courage he had shown on the battlefield. His speech, which was later written down by his devoted student Plato, is called the Apology. The word apology here does not mean an expression of regret. It comes from the Greek word apologia, meaning a defense. In his speech, Socrates did not beg for mercy. He did not grovel before the jury. He did not apologize for his life's work. Instead, he defended the very activity that had gotten him into trouble. Socrates told the jury the story of his life. He explained how his friend Chaerephon had once gone to the oracle at Delphi, the most sacred prophetic shrine in Greece, and asked if anyone was wiser than Socrates. The oracle, speaking for the god Apollo, had answered that no one was wiser. Socrates was baffled by this response. He knew that he himself was not wise, so he set out to prove the oracle wrong. He went to the people who were reputed to be the wisest in Athens, the politicians, the poets, and the craftsmen. He questioned them all and discovered that they all believed they were wise but were not. They had knowledge of their particular skill or trade, but they thought this made them experts on everything else, including how to live a good life. Socrates concluded that the oracle was right after all. He was the wisest, only because he was the only one who knew the extent of his own ignorance. This philosophical mission, Socrates told the jury, was a service to the city. He compared himself to a gadfly, a small stinging insect that bites a large and sluggish horse to keep it awake and active. Athens, he said, was like a great horse that had become lazy and complacent. His constant questioning was the sting that kept the city from falling into intellectual and moral sleep. He warned the jury that if they killed him, they would not easily find another gadfly. They would go back to their comfortable slumber and never be challenged to examine their lives again. This was an astonishingly bold thing to say to the men who held his life in their hands. But Socrates was not interested in saving his life at any cost. He was interested in remaining true to his principles. The jury voted and found Socrates guilty. The margin was closer than one might expect. According to ancient sources, approximately 280 voted for conviction and 220 voted for acquittal. A swing of just 30 votes would have set him free. After the guilty verdict, the Athenian legal system required a second phase. The prosecution proposed a penalty, which was death. The defendant was then allowed to propose a counter penalty, and the jury would choose between the two. This was Socrates' chance to propose exile or a fine, which the jury might well have accepted. But Socrates, true to his nature, was defiant. He first proposed, half-jokingly, that his punishment should be free meals at the Prytaneum, the public hall where the city honoured its greatest benefactors, including victorious Olympic athletes. He then reluctantly proposed a small fine. His wealthier friends, including Plato, offered to pay a much larger sum, but the damage was done. The jury, insulted by his apparent arrogance, voted for the death penalty by an even larger margin than the original guilty verdict. Socrates had effectively chosen to die rather than abandon his principles or pretend to be someone he was not. After the sentencing, Socrates addressed the jury one last time. He told those who had voted against him that they had done him no real harm. Death, he said, was either a dreamless sleep, which was nothing to fear, or it was a journey to another place, where he could continue his philosophical conversations with the great figures of the past. Either way, it was not an evil. The real evil, he insisted, was to do wrong. He had never done wrong, and therefore he had nothing to fear. He told the jury that no evil could come to a good man, either in life or in death. He then departed with the famous words, "The hour of departure has arrived, and we go our ways, I to die, and you to live. Which is better, God only knows." Normally, the execution would have been carried out immediately, but the trial happened to coincide with a sacred Athenian religious festival. During this time, no executions could take place. Socrates was therefore kept in prison for a month. During this time, his friends came to visit him. They were distraught, weeping, and desperate to find a way to save him. One of them, a wealthy man named Crito, arranged a plan for Socrates to escape. He had bribed the guards and prepared a safe route out of Athens. He pleaded with his old friend to take the chance, but Socrates refused. In his final conversation with Crito, which was also recorded by Plato, Socrates explained his reasons. He had lived his entire life as a citizen of Athens, benefiting from its laws, its education, and its protection. He had never left the city except to fight in its wars. He had, in a sense, made an agreement to abide by the laws of his city. To escape now, simply because the verdict had gone against him, would be to break that agreement. It would be to say that the laws only applied when it was convenient for him. Socrates believed that it was always wrong to do wrong, even in response to wrong done to you. Two wrongs do not make a right. If the jury had acted unjustly, that was their crime, not his. For him to break the law in response would be to add his own injustice to theirs. He would rather die obeying the law than live having broken it. The day of execution finally arrived. Socrates' friends gathered in his cell for one last conversation. According to Plato, who claimed to be ill and absent that day, Socrates spent his final hours discussing philosophy. The topic was the immortality of the soul. Socrates offered several arguments for believing that the soul does not perish with the body. He spoke of the soul as being akin to the divine, eternal, and unchanging forms that were the true objects of knowledge. He described the afterlife as a place where the philosophic soul, freed from the body, could finally behold truth directly. He admitted that he could not prove these things with certainty, but he said it was a noble risk to believe them, and even if he was wrong, the belief had made his life better, giving him courage and peace in the face of death. As the sun began to set, the jailer came with the cup of poison. The method of execution in Athens was to drink a potion made from the hemlock plant. Hemlock is a plant that grows wild in Greece. It contains a powerful poison that paralyzes the body from the extremities inward. Death comes slowly, over the course of an hour or more, as the paralysis creeps from the legs and arms toward the heart and lungs. It is not a peaceful death, though the ancient sources describe Socrates as facing it with remarkable calm. The jailer, who had grown fond of Socrates during his time in prison, wept as he handed over the cup. He told Socrates that he was the noblest and gentlest and best man who had ever come to that place. Many men, he said, raged against him and cursed him when he brought the poison, but Socrates had always been kind and patient and understanding. Socrates took the cup calmly. He asked the jailer for instructions on how the poison worked. The man told him to simply walk around until his legs grew heavy, then lie down. The poison would do the rest. Socrates asked if it was permitted to pour a libation from the cup to the gods, as was customary with wine. The jailer said they only prepared enough for the necessary dose. Socrates understood. He said a brief prayer for a safe journey to the other world, and then drank the hemlock without hesitation. He drained the cup completely, without trembling or changing colour or expression. His friends, who had been holding back their grief with difficulty, burst into tears when they saw him drink, but Socrates gently scolded them. He said he had sent the women away precisely to avoid such scenes. Death should be met in silence and calm, he told them. One should end one's life in good omen. He asked them to be quiet and be brave. He walked around the room until his legs grew numb. Then he lay down and covered himself with a blanket. The coldness crept up his body. Just before the end, he uncovered his face and spoke his last words to his friend Crito. He said, "Crito, we owe a rooster to Asclepius. Pay it and do not neglect it." Asclepius was the god of healing. Some have interpreted these mysterious last words to mean that Socrates saw death as a cure, a healing of the soul from the sickness of life in the body. Then he closed his eyes and was gone. The death of Socrates was a profound shock to his students and friends. It felt like a monumental injustice, the execution of the best and wisest man they had ever known by the city he had loved and served. But Socrates himself had transformed his death into his final philosophical act. He had shown that he meant what he said. He had demonstrated with his own life that he truly believed virtue was more important than survival. His calm and courageous death became the ultimate proof of his philosophy. In a strange way, the Athenians had given Socrates exactly what he needed. By killing him, they made him immortal. Socrates wrote nothing. Everything we know about him comes from the writings of others. The most important of these were his student Plato and the historian Xenophon. Both men were present at many of Socrates' conversations, and both wrote extensively about him after his death. Plato's dialogues, in particular, are masterpieces of philosophy and literature. They present Socrates as a character, engaging in brilliant and often dramatic conversations on every topic imaginable. These dialogues have been read and studied for over 2,000 years. They are the primary source for almost everything we believe about Socrates. There is a great scholarly debate about how much of the Socrates in Plato's dialogues is the real historical person, and how much is Plato putting his own ideas into his teacher's mouth. This is known as the Socratic problem. In Plato's earlier dialogues, the Socrates we meet seems to be closer to the historical figure. He claims to know nothing and uses his questioning method to expose the ignorance of others. But in Plato's later dialogues, Socrates puts forward complex and detailed philosophical theories about the nature of reality, the forms, the ideal state, and other topics. Most scholars believe that these later doctrines are more Plato's own ideas than things the historical Socrates actually taught. But we can never be entirely sure. Socrates and Plato are forever intertwined, the teacher's spirit living on in the student's words. The philosophical legacy of Socrates is immense. He is considered the founder of Western ethics, the branch of philosophy concerned with how we should live. His insistence that there are objective moral truths, not just matters of opinion, laid the foundation for all later ethical thought. His method of questioning, the Socratic method, is still used in classrooms and law schools around the world today. It teaches students to think critically, to question assumptions, and to follow an argument wherever it leads. His life itself became a model for generations of philosophers. The idea of the philosopher as someone who lives according to reason, who values truth over comfort, and who is willing to die for their convictions, all of this comes from Socrates. After Socrates' death, his students founded various philosophical schools, each claiming to carry on his legacy. The diversity of these schools shows how rich and multifaceted his teaching was. Different students took different lessons from their time with the master. Plato founded the academy in Athens, which would operate for nearly 900 years and become the model for all later universities. The academy was a place of research and discussion, where Plato and his followers developed complex philosophical systems about the nature of reality, the structure of the soul, and the ideal form of government. Plato's student Aristotle would eventually break away and found his own school, the Lyceum. Aristotle became the tutor of Alexander the Great and one of the most influential thinkers in all of history. His writings on logic, physics, biology, ethics, politics, and poetry shaped Western thought for over 2,000 years. Other students of Socrates founded different schools with very different emphases. Antisthenes founded the Cynic school, which emphasized a life of radical simplicity and rejection of social conventions. The Cynics believed that happiness came from living according to nature and freeing oneself from all artificial desires. They rejected wealth, fame, and comfort as traps that enslaved the soul. The most famous Cynic was Diogenes, who is said to have lived in a barrel and owned nothing but a cloak, a staff, and a bowl. When he saw a boy drinking water from his cupped hands, he threw away even the bowl, saying the boy had taught him that it was unnecessary. This extreme way of life was a direct development of Socrates' own voluntary poverty and indifference to material comfort. Aristippus founded the Cyrenaic school, which argued that pleasure was the highest good. This might seem like the opposite of what Socrates taught, but Aristippus claimed to have learned from his master that the purpose of philosophy was to live well. He simply interpreted living well as enjoying life's pleasures. Later, the philosopher Epicurus would develop a more refined version of this idea, teaching that the highest pleasure was the absence of pain and the peace of a tranquil mind. All of these different and sometimes contradictory movements trace their origins back to the same barefoot philosopher who had asked questions in the Athenian agora. They all claim to be the true heirs of Socrates. The influence of Socrates extended far beyond the boundaries of philosophy. The early Christian thinkers saw in Socrates a kind of pagan saint, a man who had sought truth and virtue without the benefit of divine revelation. His death at the hands of an unjust state was compared to the martyrdom of the saints. His teaching that the soul was more important than the body resonated deeply with Christian theology. In the Renaissance, Socrates became a symbol of human reason and dignity. Thinkers who wanted to challenge the authority of the church looked to the ancient philosopher as an example of someone who had relied on reason alone to find truth. In the modern era, Socrates has been claimed by everyone from existentialists to Democrats to gadflies of all kinds who challenge the powers that be. The city of Athens eventually came to regret what it had done. According to ancient tradition, the Athenians soon felt remorse for executing Socrates. They punished his accusers. Miletus was reportedly put to death, and the others were exiled. A bronze statue of the philosopher was erected in a place of honour. Whether or not these specific details are true, the broader point is clear. History has judged the trial of Socrates to be a terrible mistake. The jury that condemned him has been condemned in turn by the centuries. The gadfly they swatted away has become one of the most revered figures in human history. The place where Socrates lived and died can still be visited today. The Agora of Athens has been excavated by archaeologists. You can walk among the ruins of the colonnades where he once held his conversations. You can see the foundations of the buildings where he was tried and imprisoned. The cell where he drank the hemlock was located on the slopes of the hill near the Agora. A small marble monument marks the traditional site. Visitors still come from around the world to stand in this quiet place and reflect on the life and death of the philosopher. The stones are silent now, but they still carry the echo of his voice, still asking the questions that have no easy answers. In the end, the greatest legacy of Socrates is not any particular doctrine or teaching. It is the example of his life. He showed us that the unexamined life is not worth living. He demonstrated that the pursuit of truth is more important than the pursuit of wealth, fame, or power. He proved that one person, armed only with honest questions and a courageous spirit, can change the course of human history. He never wrote a word, but his life became a text that has been read for over 2,000 years. He owned almost nothing, but he left behind a wealth of ideas that has enriched every generation since. He was condemned by his city, but he was vindicated by the world. The stonemason's son, the snub-nosed philosopher who wandered barefoot through the streets of Athens, became the founder of a tradition of inquiry that continues to this very day. Socrates once said that the soul is harmed by injustice and benefited by virtue. He lived his entire life according to this belief. He cared for his soul above all else. He questioned everything and everyone, including himself. He refused to stop seeking the truth, even when it cost him his life. In the end, his executioners freed him from the prison of his body and sent his soul on its final journey. If he was right about the immortality of the soul, then he is still somewhere, still asking questions, still searching for wisdom. And if he was wrong, then his soul lives on in a different way, in the minds and hearts of everyone who has ever read his story and been inspired to think more deeply about how to live. Either way, Socrates got exactly what he wanted. He became immortal through philosophy. The gadfly of Athens still stings us today, waking us from our comfortable sleep and urging us to care for our souls. His voice, carried through the millennia by the words of Plato and others, still asks us the most important question of all: how should a human being live?